I have often walked down.
Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Chicago jazz pianist David Shelton during early February 2021 about his new 2021 CD, Drift, with his trio featuring Beth Kuhn. He grew up in Missouri and started accordion lessons at the age of 6 and had his first public performances at the age of 8. He went on to Washington University in St. Louis, and after college he moved to Chicago and pursued a business career. Music remained a passion, and he played frequently at community events and parties. It was only a matter of time before he began performing professionally on a regular basis. He's got a great story. Dig it.
Thank you for taking a minute out to talk about your new material and what's going on in the world, things like that. I appreciate it.
Sure. Glad to. Well, thank you for taking the time to do the interview.
Yeah, you bet. So let's talk about your latest 2021 CD, Drift, with your trio and Beth Kuhn. Talk to me a little bit about, this coming out during a pandemic and kind of how you feel about the project overall.
Well, we actually did the recording in 2019. We got the final mixes done early 2020. But then things sort of fell apart, so we had to delay the launch. And we finally decided, well, let's just go ahead with it. That's what we've done, but no release party or anything like that. It was a good experience. It all started with working with Beth Kuhn, who's the vocalist on the album. We had done a Christmas album in 2015. It was actually mainly a piano album, but she did several vocal tracks. We decided we wanted to do something else together, and I'd also written some tunes, a couple of which were vocals, so I asked her if she'd be interested in doing those. And she said yes. That's how it all evolved. We had gone back to the same studio we had done the original Christmas album at, which is Steve Yates' recording. Steve's done a lot of the jazz folks in the Chicago area over the years. He's a great guy, a very good musician himself with a good ear, and he has a wonderful piano. So that makes a big difference. So that's how it all evolved. And in terms of the concept of the album, we probably should have given that more thought ahead of time. One of those learning experiences, since I haven't done a whole lot of what I would call serious recording, where you're going to have something released. I'd done some demos before and that sort of thing. There was one song in the album, it's called Drift, that was the backbone of the album. Did you by chance scuba dive?
No, I'd love to.
I love diving and underwater photography. And anyway, there's a kind of dive called a drift dive. And that's where you drop in off of the dive boat somewhere along the reef, and where there's a current, and then the current allows you to just drift along the reef if the current isn't too strong, which it can be. If it isn't too strong, it's just a wonderful feeling of freedom. You're sort of floating weightless, and it's just a wonderful feeling of freedom. And at the same time, the stuff going on the reef is just very interesting, beautiful, fascinating. And then there are things that cause you to catch your breath too. A good-sized shark might show up, or a big moray eel might jump out, or a larger fish catches a smaller fish. And it sort of struck me that this is just a lot like human life. We kind of drift along, and much of the time we're observing instead of participating. But then there's sudden jolts that reality checks that wake us up. So anyway, out of that came I composed Drift, and then decided to put it together with some other songs that express different kinds of emotions. So, just as you see the good and the bad and the beautiful and the ugly along the reef, there's some happy songs and some not so happy songs, but sort of the gamut of the range of human emotions.
So you've had a history in Missouri. You grew up and started playing the accordion here. Talk to me about your history here.
My history, my sordid history. Yeah, I grew up in near Springfield, in a small town, a town by the name of Mount Vernon. When I was 6, we were at a friend's house, and there were 2 sisters who, I can't remember why they were there, but they played the accordion, and I was fascinated with it and asked my parents if I could take accordion lessons. And my parents, to their great credit, arranged for it, and I got a little 12-button accordion, and we started going to Springfield for accordion lessons. Within a couple, 3 years, was performing at Saturday night music in the square kinds of things, and at school and that sort of thing. I really liked music. So when 4th grade came around for band tryouts, I decided I wanted to play the trumpet. But I was wearing braces, and that wasn't working with the trumpet. But clarinet did, so I took up the clarinet. And by around 12, I think I actually started giving lessons in both accordion and clarinet to younger kids. And then I went to Springfield for clarinet lessons at Drury College from a professor there. By 6th grade, decided I wanted to play the piano as well. Started with a neighbor lady, and shortly thereafter had a great stroke of luck. There was the head of the music program at the local high school, Mount Vernon High School, was a guy by the name of Otis Estes. For him to be in Mount Vernon, Missouri was just an unbelievable stroke of luck. He's a very eccentric guy, which is I think why he was there. He had gone to Northwestern and studied music, and I believe he had a master's degree from Northwestern. He was notoriously demanding. He would only take a handful of students. So I started taking from him, and then in due course, I participated in the different state festivals, the competitions where you go from, district to region to state. Was able to do well in those. I went all the way to the state with 1 or 1+ ratings in clarinet all 4 years. Piano the last 2 years. I was, all conference band and that sort of thing. Just had a lot of success, and went to the University of Arkansas a couple of summers to music camp, and was there with Bill Clinton. Bill was a little older than I was, but that was my first chance to really play jazz. I played piano in the jazz band, and they did have a stage band, and then we had a quartet with Bill playing sax, and I played piano. So I'd had absolutely no training in jazz on piano. I was just, doing it by ear. Well, I had sort of, even though all my training was in classical, I had this interest in jazz. And my parents, unfortunately, weren't musicians. I think maybe they had some aptitude, but my mother especially, well, my dad too, and they really enjoyed it, but we didn't have music playing around the house, which was unfortunate. But I did buy some LPs, especially big bands, Artie Shaw and Benny Goodman, because of the clarinet. Between that and getting introduced to the jazz band at University of Arkansas, I really got intrigued with jazz. Another guy from my high school who had gone to band camp with me was a drummer, and so we would get together and jam. He didn't have a drum kit, which was a problem, so I remember he used my mother's wooden meat board for a snare and a fan for his ride cymbal. So it was, in hindsight, pretty hysterical. But so those were my first jam sessions. in due course, I got together a small group to play some mainly swing kind of stuff, and we had cardboard music stands. We called ourselves the Dukes, kind of, I guess, after the Dukes at Dixieland. We played 3 or 4 gigs, I think, and got booted out of town after that. But anyway, so that was the early career, and I thought about a major in music and had some music scholarship opportunities, but I decided I wanted to go to med school, so I took a pass on the music scholarships and ended up going to Washington University in St. Louis. Continued taking piano and clarinet lessons there for a couple of years. Didn't really participate in anything else in music in the official program. And unfortunately, one of my great regrets, I didn't take any theory courses, which would have been a great thing to do. But I did play at some university functions and fraternity functions, things like that. And so continued to play music, but it just wasn't at the forefront of what I was doing. But then I in due course decided I didn't want to go to med school because I hated laboratories, and figured that wouldn't be a good match. So I decided I was going to go to law school. But they introduced a 3-2 program at WashU where you could go into graduate business school after your junior year in arts and science, get an MBA and a BA after 5 years. So I decided to take advantage of that with Vietnam looming large. Was able to complete that program. And while I was doing that, I got introduced to a Sunday night jam session that was going on near campus. So I started going to the Sunday night jam sessions and met some good musicians, and started playing jazz. And in due course, that led to a few piano solo gigs at a restaurant in Clayton, Missouri. And then with a trio, played at a place called the Puppet Pub. And then met a guy who played drums and mallets, great marimba player. And along with 3 or 4 other guys, we had a few gigs. One of my most vivid memories of the Puppet Pub was we had a young bass player whose name was Robin Hood. That was literally his name. A drummer by the name of Chipper Stark. Chipper, I think, subbed in the St. Louis Symphony on timpani, if memory serves me. Anyway, we were playing the theme from Romeo and Juliet very dramatically, and Chipper was doing something with mallets on the right cymbal, and all of a sudden his cymbal fell off the podium. This is one of those typical memories you have from playing jazz. Crashed right into the table in front, and people had drinks all around, and of course the drinks went everywhere. And anyway, that was a great memory from my St. Louis jazz career. In due course, I decided when I didn't have to go to NAM because I kind of messed up my knee playing football. Best thing I ever got out of football. I decided to work for a year in Chicago before going to law school, and then during that year decided I didn't want to go to law school. So stayed in Chicago.
When we do return, when COVID kind of slows down and we get back to live music, what do you hope we all realize about this time away from live music?
That's a really good question. I mean, live music has been suffering so much anyway, with DJs and so on, that especially for jazz, it's been a real challenge. For us personally, at this point in my career, it's probably not going to be the playing at restaurants, for example, or maybe even private parties. I think there will be a return, maybe a hunger for music, including jazz, at festivals and concerts. I hope that's what happens, that there's a hunger for it, and that people will be receptive and anxious to hear the music. I think there's in general, a lack of appreciation for the intricacies and complexities of jazz. I find jazz more intellectually stimulating than I do classical, even though I still do a little classical and belong to a piano club that plays mainly classical. But I don't think most people appreciate that. When we play, we always try just to make sure we get to play a second time. We try to work in some arrangements of some pop tunes, maybe a Motown song or something like that, or Burt Bacharach stuff is always good, or some of the Beatles things, because people kind of relate to that more than they do to the more traditional jazz standards. The Davis stuff and things like that.
So why do you love jazz?
I mentioned I love the intellectual stimulation from it. I really love reharmonization and just the concept of what kinds of scales go with what kinds of chords. I mean, after a while you don't think about that, but you just play what sounds good. But what sounds good you've kind of picked up from having done some woodshedding with the different scales and the different chords and voicings and so on. I love the harmonies themselves, the music itself, and the different places it can take you. I think much more so than, at least for me, much more so than pop music and certainly rock. I also love the people that you meet. I think as a group, jazz musicians are wonderful people. They're invariably bright people, and they're generally very nice people. That's not always the case with rock people, I don't think. But I just find them very stimulating. In general, I love the spontaneity. In fact, we're actually in Florida right now, so I can still do work remotely, and so we're in Florida for a while, so we can be outside, and so we've had a number of garage sessions outside here, which we did in Chicago as well over the summer. I guess I didn't mention that when we talked about COVID and playing. We played, I have met a retired doctor where we were at, which is a golf community in Naples. It turns out Rick is a really fine musician. He's a very knowledgeable musician. He's a pianist, but he's also a very good bassist. So we've been playing quite a bit duo. So the club had asked us if we would play outside on Sunday evening or late afternoon, and they had a bar set up and everything. And so we were playing. Someone had given us the name of a sax player, but we hadn't heard from him. But after listening to us play for a little while, I noticed a guy who I didn't recognize paying particular attention. He came up between songs and said, introduced himself and said, I play sax and I'd really like to play with you guys. I said, sure, that would be great. And he said, well, I have my sax in the car. So I said, well, go get it. So he did, and it turned into a real happening. It turned out to be a beautiful sunset, and the crowd went crazy. It turns out he, a trader, I'm not sure the particulars yet, but he has a degree in music from Berkeley. So he's a serious player. And it was just that spontaneous kind of thing, and we just had a great evening. It's that sort of thing, that spontaneity I really love about jazz. I remember one evening early on when I was first starting to play professionally, or do a professional gig, we were in need of a bass player. Actually, I guess I was subbing that night. We ended up with Nick Schneider, who's one of the better bass players in Chicago, and we started a song too fast. And after about 16 bars, Nick said, just called and said, guys, stop. It's pretty easy to speed up a song, but it's really hard to slow down the song, and we're doing this way too fast. So we just started over, and it worked out just fine. But there's so many fun things that I can recollect like that.
Hey, man, thank you for opening up about the new album. Thank you for opening up about your love of jazz and your career. I really appreciate it.
Great, appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview. We'll give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Chicago, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to David for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Where you live.
Neon Jazz.